Good afternoon, all. Today we'll deal with the Romantic period. It spans from 1798 to 1837. So it begins with the transitional poets. There was a reaction against the intellectual Augustan poetry. That is, against there was a reaction against the neoclassical period. Neoclassical period was full of logic, decorum, precision, etc. But moving to the transitional poetry, there was sentimentalism. Uh, they depicted the rural life. There was an organic view of poetry and also sense of mystery and wonder. So the important transitional poets are William Blake, Thomas Gray, and Robert Burns. William Collins and William Cowper are also the transitional poets. They are the precursors of Romanticism. James Thomson is a Scottish poet. His important works are The Seasons and The Castle of Indolence. So he also wrote works such as Britannia, Liberty, Sophonisba, Agamemnon, etc. Sophonisba was a tragedy. Pope wrote a verse prologue to this Sophonisba. The Seasons is an important poem because it comprises of four poems: winter, summer, spring, and autumn. It is a work written in quasi-Miltonic blank verse, and the revised edition came in 1744. So James Thomson's The Seasons is an important work, and The Castle of Indolence is the other major work. The Castle of Indolence was a narrative poem. He worked for 15 years to complete it. So it was written in two cantos, two parts, and Spencerian stanza was the verse. Actually, Washington Irving, the American writer, when you study the American literature, you will came to know about him. Washington Irving quotes the first lines of this poem in the opening of his The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. So, a pleasing land of drowsy head it was. That is, he quotes the lines in the work The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. The poem influenced many Gothic writers. Thomas Gray is very, very important. You have to remember his important works. Sometimes it can be asked. He was a prominent poet of the 18th century after Pope. He was offered the poet laureateship when College Sibbert died, but he refused. So his major works are he translated John Locke's essay concerning human understanding, and he wrote Ode on the Spring, Ode on the Death of a Favorite Cat drowned in a bowl of cold fishes. It was written in the form of a mock epic. So the sonnet of the Richard on the death of Richard West was also written by him. His famous works are Hymn to Adversity, Ode on a Distant Prospect of Eton College. No more where ignorance is bliss, just folly to be allied. These lines are from Ode on a Distant Prospect of Eton College. His most famous work is Elegy Written at Country Churchyard. It was published in 1751. It was a seminal work in the Graveyard School of Poetry. It was written in the graveyard of the church in Stock Porges, Buckinghamshire. So he contemplates the futility of life in this. So, Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard is a very important work. You have to remember that. And also, it is two Pindaric chords: the Progress of Poesy, a Pindaric chord, and the Bard. That is important. The Progress of Poesy, a Pindaric chord, and the Bard. Now, William Blake, you might have studied his poems, The Lamb and Tiger. So he was a poet and painter. He never went to school. He was educated at home. So he wrote many magnificent works such as poetical sketches. He wrote songs of innocence and songs of experience. Since he was a painter, he used to illuminate the books. That is, since he had several paintings of his own, he carved this. So, some poetic sketches, Song of Innocence, and Songs of Experience, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell are other important works. Tyrion is also a book in his work. Songs of Innocence and Experience shows the two contrary states of the human soul. That is, innocence and experience. And Lamb and Tiger are important poems from this collection, Songs of Innocence and Experience. So he wrote a book about Milton, a poem in two books. Jerusalem, The Ghost of Abel. It was a poetic drama of 70 lines, and Everlasting Gospels. So Blake's Apocalypse is a book by Harold Bloom. Just remember, you don't have to remember all the works, but just remember that Songs of Innocence and Experience are written by William Blake. He was a painter and writer. Blake's Apocalypse is a book written by Harold Bloom. Then Robert Burns is a famous poet from the Scotland. So he was a Scottish poet. He wrote in English and Scottish. He was called Plowman poet. He wrote the famous poem A Red Red Rose. So uh, it was. He also combined poems chiefly in the Scottish dialect. It includes poems such as To a Mouse, The Cotter's Saturday Night, A Red Red Rose, etc. The Kilmarnock volume and Tom O'Shandle, the narrative poem by only one narrative poem by Robert Burns is famous. So he was much celebrated poet of his time. He was from Scotland. A Red Red Rose is important work. Other poets were William Collins, William Cowper, George Crabbe, Thomas Chatterton. Thomas Chatterton, about that is Wordsworth describes him about in Resolution and Independence. He was a marvelous boy, the sleepless soul that perished in his pride. Coleridge also wrote a monody on Chatterton. Robert Southey edited his poems. In Adonai, Shelley ranks Chatterton with Sir Philip Sidney as inheritors of unfulfilled renown. Skeats dedicated Endymion to him, Thomas Chatterton. He died at a very young age. And transition period to the prose, there was the emergence of Gothic novels. So, Gothic novel was a European romantic pseudo-medieval fiction. It had a prevailing atmosphere, mystery, and terror. So, there were the novels of that aroused mystery and terror. It was common in such settings such as haunted castles, monasteries were there, then passages, dark passages, haunted house, etc. So the first Gothic novel was Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto, a Gothic story. So there are several other writers such as Anne Radcliffe who wrote Mysteries of Udolpho, etc. And there was Monk Lewis, so Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto is important. Then William Godwin. Just remember about the Gothic novels. Make a brief note of your own. So Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto or Gothic story was an important Gothic novel, and there were several foreigners such as Monk Lewis and Radcliffe, etc. William Godwin was a philosopher, journalist, and novelist. He was an exponent of utilitarianism. William Godwin is husband, I mean, is the partner of Mary Wollstonecraft, and together they had a daughter, Mary Shelley, who married P.B. Shelley. So, William Godwin was Shelley's father in law. He was a philosopher, journalist, and novelist. He was an exponent of utilitarianism. He wrote an inquiry concerning political justice. And Things as They Are or The Adventures of Caleb Williams is a Gothic novel. Then Mary Wollstonecraft, you might have studied her from feminist theory. She was best known for her feminist tract, The Vindication of the Rights of Women. So she also wrote two novels, Mary a Fiction and Maria or the Wrongs of Woman. It was published posthumously by William Godwin, and it was considered as a novelist sequel to A Vindication of the Rights of Women. Then original stories from the real life, the female reader, miscellaneous pieces in prose and verses under the pen name. She wrote it under the pen name Mr. Creswick. So a vindication of the rights of women, and she has also written a vindication of the rights of men as a reply to Edmund Burke's reflection on the revolution in France. It was in the form of a letter to Burke. Vigorously attacked Burke's ideas. A vindication of the rights of women, Mary Wollstonecraft is associated with a vindication of the rights of women. It is one of the earliest texts of Western feminism. The subtitle of a vindication of the rights of women is Strictures on Political and Moral Subjects. There is an extension of her arguments in the rights of men, and she advocated for equality of sexes and also responded to those educational and political theorists of the 18th century who believed that women should not receive a rational education. So the themes of this text were rational education, equality, feminism, republicanism, etc. Wollstonecraft dedicated this work to Talleyrand. Now, moving on to the Romantic age, it was filled with new sensibilities. It also reflected the ideals of French Revolution, and it started with the publication of Lyrical Ballads by William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and it ends with the accession of Queen Victoria in 1837. So, 1837 marks the beginning of Victorian age. So the period coincided with the revolutions of French revolutions and American Revolution. A lot of ideologies from such as liberty, equality from France and America were influenced the Romanticist movement. German poet Legend used the term romantic to describe the literature for the first time. He defined it as a literature depicting emotional matter rather than an imaginative form. So Romanticism was more concerned with nature, emotions, sentiments, etc. Passion, they preferred passion over reason, imagination over logic. And there was strong individualism, there was natural language, and they exhorted for the return to nature and idealization of rural living. In almost all of William Wordsworth and Coleridge's poem, we can see this. That is, there was they advocated the return to nature and pantheistic philosophy. They worshipped nature. There was passion over reason. Individualism was there. There was the influence of French Revolution, etc. The lyrical ballads were published by Wordsworth and Coleridge in 1798. The full title is Lyrical Ballads with a few other poems. It was a seminal text that inaugurated the Romantic period. It declares the dawn of the English Romantic movement. So he brought the neoclassical tendencies in poetry. It spoke to the ordinary man in their own language. So the first publication was in 1798. The year is very, very, very important. It can be asked for net exam, like to match the following with the correct dates. Neither Wordsworth nor Coleridge's name was given as the author in the 1798 edition. It had an advertisement, and 19 poems were written by Wordsworth and 4 poems by Coleridge. The first poem was Coleridge's Ancient Mariner, Time of the Ancient Mariner, and the final poem was Wordsworth's Tintern Epic. So the second edition came in 1800. It had a preface written by Wordsworth. The preface is regarded as romantic manifesto wherein Wordsworth describes his poetic theory. That is, he makes this famous definition: poetry is a spontaneous outflow of powerful feelings, and the language really should be used. The language of the ordinary man should be used. So in 1800 edition, it was Wordsworth that was written as a it was written as Wordsworth as a sole author. It also included additional poems including Lucy Gray and Michael. The poem The Convict was also in 1798 edition, but Wordsworth omitted it from the 1800 edition, replacing it with Coleridge's Love. In another edition of 1802, he added an appendix titled Poetic Diction, in which he expanded the ideas set forth in the preface. The third edition was in 1802 and the fourth edition came in 1805. So these three editions, such as the edition in 1798, the second edition with the preface in 1800, and the third edition of 1802 are important. Then the first generation of Romantic poets included late poets such as William Wordsworth, Southey, and Coleridge because they belong to the Lake District. Second generation included Lord Byron, Shelley, and Keats. The Lake Poets were a group of English poets who all lived in the Lake District of England in the first half of 19th century. Who are the Lake Poets? They are William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and Robert Southey. Sometimes a question can be asked: identify who is not a Lake Poet among them. It was asked once in next exam. So these three, Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Southey, are the important three lake poets. They were first described derogatorily as a lake school by Francis and later in Geoffrey in Edinburgh Review. The three main figures later came to be known as the Lake School. William Wordsworth was born in Cumberland Lake District. His first poem was On seeing Miss Helena Maria Williams weep at a tale of distress. It was published in the European magazine in 1787. He met Coleridge in 1795, and the early poems such as an evening walk and descriptive sketches, etc., were published. He also published Lyrical Ballads with Coleridge in 1798, wrote Preface in the second edition 1800, enlarged the edition in 1802. Tintern Abbey is a very important line. The full title of Tintern Abbey is Lines Written a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey on Revisiting the Banks of the Wye during a tour July 13, 1798 is the full title. He shows his attitude to nature and he composed it in blank verse. So, Dorothy Wordsworth, sister of William Wordsworth, was also a prominent figure in shaping his literary career. The Prelude was published posthumously in 1850. The subtitle of Prelude is The Growth of a Poet's Mind. It was an autobiographical poem. It consists of 14 books which is written in blank verse, and it is an account of his growth and development as a poet. It was intended as a prologue to the unfinished poem, The Recluse. Another section of The Recluse was published as The Excursion. He never gave a title called the poem to Coleridge. The Lucy poems were a series of five poems written between 1798 and 1801, and four of these were published in the second edition of Lyrical Ballads. Immortality, or its full title is Imitations of Immortality from Recollections of Early Childhood. It was inspired by Henry Vaughan's The Retreat. We studied Henry Vaughan in the Cavalier Poetry, so it was inspired by Henry Vaughan's The Retreat. The Prelude, Lucy Poems, and Immortality. Or other famous works include The White Dove of Rylstone, The Wagoner, Peter Bell, Yarrow Visitor, Revisited. His Petrarchan sonnets are The World is Too Much with Us. In London, 1802, he describes about John Milton. It is a beauteous evening, it's another Petrarchan sonnet. The famous poems such as The Solitary Reaper, you might have studied that, Daffodils, Resolution and Independence, and Michael are very important. The only play by Wordsworth is The Borderers in 1842. So he succeeded Sade as poet laureate in 1843. So when he ascended to that is he fought against the establishment in his initial part of the career, but later when he became poet laureate, William Hazlitt accused him for abandoning his ideals. Robert Browning accused him in the poem The Lost Leader, and another week newspaper attacked him, etc. Then some of the important lines. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills. It is from Daffodils. 5 years have passed. That is from Tintern Abbey. The world is too much with us. That is from the sonnet. The world is too much with us. London 1802 opens with Milton. Thou should be living at this hour. England had a need of thee. Then next is Samuel Taylor Coleridge. He was a philosopher, critic, and poet. His first poems appeared in the Morning Chronicle in 1794. He collaborated with Robert Sade, another late poet, to write the play The Fall of Robespierre in 1795. He met Wordsworth in 1795 and it influenced Coleridge's verse. So his issue of a liberal political period called Watchman, the Watchman was important. It was once asked for the NET exam. The Watchman. It was printed every 8 days. It consists of 10 issues. The first book was poems on various subjects. He also produced lyrical ballads with Wordsworth in 1798. His 8 conversation poems include Dejection and Ode to William Wordsworth, The Alien Harp and the Nightingale. Christabel was wrote in, first part was in 1797, second part was added in 1800. It was unfinished and unpublished till 1860. Kubla Khan, I think most of you might have studied it. The subtitle is A Vision in a Dream. It speaks about Kubla Khan, the Emperor of Sanadu. It was unfinished work. Actually, he was in sleep, so some person from Porlock disrupted him and he couldn't remember the rest of the lines. So, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, it is in the form of a ballad. So, it was also published in Lyrical Ballads. He wrote the play Rumors, a tragedy in 5 acts. Now, Biographia Literaria is an important critical work by Coleridge. It consists of two volumes and works in 23 chapters. It's a combination of autobiography and literary criticism. It traces his life from childhood to his collaboration with Wordsworth, and he gives the famous definition about fancy and imagination. He classifies imagination into two, like consists of two types: primary imagination and secondary imagination, and distinguishes between fancy and imagination. So, aids to reflection, church and state, and lectures on Shakespeare and other poets are other important points. Robert Southey is the third important late poet. He was a poet, historian, and critic. And in 1813, Southey succeeded Henry James Pye as poet laureate. He wrote the poem Joan of Arc in support of French Revolution. He collaborated with Coleridge on a play, The Fall of Robespierre, and letters written during a short residence in Spain and Portugal were written at this time. Calabar the Destroyer was an oriental verse epic. Medoc, the Curse of Kahama, is a long epic. Roderick, the Last of the Gods. A Vision of Judgment commemorates King George III's elevation into heaven. It also attacks Byron and his satanic school. Then he also wrote the history of Brazil, history of Peninsular War, and the life of Nelson. So, Vision of Judgment commemorates King George III's elevation into heaven, also attacks Byron and his satanic school. Then the next generation of romantic poets included Byron, Shelley, and Keats. So, you might be familiar with the term Byronic hero because Byronic hero was alienated from the rest of the society. He had his own peculiar character sketch. He was moody. He was contemplating about the meanings of life, etc. So, Byronic hero John Murray was his publisher, and Hours of Idleness is his first volume of poetry. And the subtitle was by George Gordon Lord Byron, a minor. He imitated the classic poets, Roman poets. A critical review of it appeared in the Edinburgh Review, and Byron replied with English parts and Scotch reviewers in a satire. Fugitive Pieces was a small volume of verse, poems on various occasions. Child Harold's Pilgrimage was the account of his travels in Spenserian stanza. Harold is a first Byronic hero. It was published in two cantos. And The Prisoner of Chillon was a dramatic monologue. It begins with the sonnet on Chillon. Beppo was a long Venetian story. It was a long poem. It used ottava rima. Mazeppa was another poem based on a story told by Voltaire. Don Juan was a comic epic. It was an important poem, picaresque novel. That is hero is a rock in picaresque novel in verse. It begins with a dedication to Sade and Wordsworth, whom Byron lampooned here. It consists of 17 cantos. Last one is unfinished. The Vision of Judgment is written by Lord Byron. A Vision of Judgment is written by Robert Southey. The Vision of Judgment was published in Lehan's The Liberal. He also wrote several blank verse dramas. They are Manfred, closer drama, which was produced only for the private pleasure, to be enjoyed in private spaces. Cain, Mariano Faliero, Heaven and Earth are other important works. So, P.B. Shelley, he was also called the Mad Shelley or Eton atheist. The necessity of atheism is important work, and Hune Mab is an utopian allegory. Alaster, or there is a spelling mistake, it is Alaster, Alastor. Alaster, or the Spirit of Solitude, is a spiritual autobiography. It was a long poem written in blank verse. So it was Thomas Love Peacock who suggested the name Alaster, him to intellectual beauty. The revolt of Islam is a reworking of his Lion and Sintna, a narrative poem. It is an epic political poem in Spenserian stanza. Ozymandias is a sonnet on a statue of an Egyptian king. Julian and Medello is his relation with Byron. Prometheus Unbound is a lyrical drama in four acts. The Cenci was a verse tragedy. The Mask of Anarchy was ballad form. Ode to the West Wind is very, very important poem. Songs to the Men of England, England in 1890. A Defense of Poetry was a prose. It was published in 1840 in reply to Peacock's song The Four Ages of Poetry. Shelley's Adonai was dedicated to Keats. He wrote this on the death of Keats. Keats is depicted as Adonai. So he blames the wholesale Tory critics for Keats' death. Other English poets who died, Chatterton, Sidney, and Lucan, are also born. Epicedion, The Triumph of Life, was his last major poem. It was left unfinished. It describes life as a painted page. The Out to the West Wing, To a Skylark, The Cloud, To Night, To Liberty, and To Naples are other important works. He also started a periodical, The Liberal. Coleridge started a periodical, The Watchman. He also translated Goethe, and he was known under the pseudonym The Hermit of Marlowe. The Hermit of Marlowe. These are the lines from West Wind. Oh, wild West Wind, thou breath of autumn's wing, oh, lift me as a wave and leave the cloud I fall upon the thorns of life. Then Keats was an inspiration poet, romantic poet. He developed the idea of negative capability. Please look up due to time limit. We can't explain everything. So, on first looking into Chapman's Homer, Sleep and Poetry, Endymion was his first long poem. It was dedicated again to Thomas Chatterton. It was written in heroic couplets. A thing of beauty is a joy forever, is the famous line from Endymion. Isabella or the plot of Basil. It is a story adapted from Boccaccio's Decameron. It was inspired by the three Raphaelites. Then John Keats wrote the five odes, which is important, sorry, six odes. Ode on indolence, on a Grecian urn, to Psyche, to Nightingale, to Melancholy, and to Autumn. These are very, very important. Sometimes it is asked to match some of the lines with the correct ode, or it is sometimes asked to arrange chronologically. Hyperion is an important work. It was unfinished. It employed Greek images and characters. And he was attacked by Tory critics in the Quarterly Review. In the beginning of his career, he had to face attack by the Tory critics. He was called the member of the Cockney School of Hunt, Hazlitt, and Keats. So Keats and Hazlitt were ridiculed as a Cockney school in Blackwood's magazine as well. All melodies are sweet, that is from modern Grecian art. Beauty is truth, truth is beauty, that is also from modern Grecian art. So, the prose writers of the period included Charles Lamb, William Hazlitt, Thomas D. Quincey, Sir Walter Scott, Jane Austen, Mary Wollstonecraft, and Mary Shelley. Some of the important periodicals of this period are The Examiner, Edinburgh Review, Quarterly Review, Blackwood's Magazine, London Magazine, and Westminster Review. So Charles Lamb was a poet and essayist of the Romantic period. He wrote tales from Shakespeare in collaboration with his sister Mary Lamb. He retells of Shakespearean plays for children, and it was under William Godwin's suggestion that he began to write it. Then contribution to other journals were also visible. On the character and genius of Hogarth, that is not important. Tales, only tales from Shakespeare is important. Then essays of Elias is another important work. It contributed to London Magazine under the pseudonym Elia. So his sister Mary Lamb is called Cousin Bridget. The second series of essay, that is the last essays of Elia, was also published in 1833. His essays were largely personal in nature, so his own ruminations about life. And on the tragedies of Shakespeare, the Southsea House was the first essay in the essays of Elia. Oxford in the Vacation was second essay in the essays of Elia. It is about the author's visit to Oxford University. Then Charles Lamb brought Dream Children a Reverie. Lamb creates two imaginary characters, Alice and John, as his little ones. So there are two imaginary characters, Alice and John, who considered as his children, but all this take place in his imagination. That is Dream Children, a Reverie. The Old Benches of the Inner Temple, The Superannuated Man, Memorials of Charles Lamb. William Hazlitt was another essayist and critic. He was he wrote political essays. and characters of Shakespeare, which was dedicated to Lamb. The Round Table, written with Lehan, was also important. Table Talk was a collection of essays in two volumes. It attacked Shelley in it. The Spirit of the Age is an essay on the works and personalities of his 25 contemporaries. Includes Godwin, Byron, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Lamb, and Scott. And the Thomas D. Quincey is very important for this. The Confessions of an English Opium Eater. He was an opium addict. Later, he quit that. So, the descriptions of his opium addicted life is described in the Confessions of an English Opium Eater. And on the knocking at the gate in Macbeth is one of his best critical essays. It discusses Act 2, Scene 3 in Macbeth. He analyzes it from a psychological perspective. Cloisterham is a Gothic novel, sketches of life and manners from autobiography of English opium eater, etc. The Farragut Scott is famous for his Scottish novels, poet and critic, for his Waverley novels. He was a Scottish novelist, poet and critic. He was well known for his Waverley novels. So he had a prominent role in establishing the Quarterly Review. Waverley is regarded as the first historical novel which was published anonymously, and its subtitle was It's 60 Years Since. Various other novels such as Rob Roy the Pirate, Talisman were written by Walter Scott. Ivanhoe, a romance, was best known work, historical romance set in 12th century under the reign of King Richard I, or the Lionheart. Richard was the Lionheart. Kenilworth was set in Elizabethan England. Moving on to the next important female writer, that is Jane Austen. You might be familiar with her works. You should make a note of here on, because most of the time important characters and novels of Jane Austen are asked. Sometimes it may be asked to arrange chronologically. Sometimes you will be able to you should be able to choose the right characters from the novels. So, Sense and Sensibility was written in 1811. Its title was Eleanor and Marianne. It was first published work. It was published under the pseudonym A Lady. So, Eleanor and Marianne Dashwood represents sense and sensibility, respectively. Then Prejudice was written in 1813. Pride and Prejudice. Its first title was The Impressions. So it's famous for its opening line. It's a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of the good fortune must be in want of a wife. So Pride and Prejudice. It was also called First Impressions, and the main characters were Charles Bingley, Darcy, Elizabeth, Jane, Kitty, Mary, Lydia, etc. So, Pride and Prejudice you might have studied, and most of you might have read it also. You have to make clear out not for Jane Austen. Due to time limit, we can't explain each and every novel. Mansfield Park was written in 1814, and the main characters were Fanny Price, Henry Crawford, Edmund Bertram, and Maria Bertram. Emma was another novel. It was based on youthful hubris and romantic misunderstandings. It is set in the fictional country village called Highbury. Emma Woodhouse is the main character. Mr. Knightley, Frank Churchill, Jane Fairfax, Harriet Smith, etc. are the major characters. Persuasion is again published and anonymously, as published posthumously along with Northanger Abbey. So it was published after her death along with Northanger Abbey. It was set against the superficial social life in Bath. Northanger Abbey it was written in 1818. The heroine is Catherine Morland. She was a girl who was fond of reading Gothic novels, and she read Anne Radcliffe's The Mysteries of Udolpho. Lady Susan was an epistolary novel, and Watson's another novel. So, Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park, Emma, Persuasion, and Northanger Abbey is very, very important. Mary Shelley was a daughter of the political philosopher Wiliam Godwin and feminist radical Mary Wollstonecraft. We already discussed that. She was married to P.B. Shelley, and her famous work were Frankenstein, The Modern Prometheus. It was a Gothic novel. She dedicated this to her father, William Godwin, and P.B. Shelley wrote the preface to Frankenstein. It was written in the form of an epistolary novel, which was contained within a story within the story. So Victor Frankenstein was the protagonist. He was a very ambitious young man. The epigraph to Frankenstein is taken from John Milton's epic. So Matilda is another novel which is posthumously published. Lodore and Wagner, which are both semi-autobiographical novels. So Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus is a seminal piece. So with that, we'll end today's session. So please make your own notes for Jane Austen.